I think the biggest question that often college students ask themselves once they graduate is, okay, I finished college, but what now? That's a question that we're going to be answering in this 5-part series, answering the question of who am I, the 5 greatest barriers to discovering who you are. And
Okay.
today we're going to be talking about that first barrier, which is overthinking.
Dang, what a
One,
banger intro.
what a banner intro, but
You just
I
compliment
just like
yourself.
I'm like just fourth walling myself there. No, so I think that this is a really big one. I think when I was doing my research about just like this entire series, overthinking was actually the first one that came up as like a barrier to what causes people to not be able to find out who they are. And I think it's because our generation, Gen Z, if you would, Gen Z, Gen A, are experiencing more levels of anxiety than in any generation prior. And so I think it's no surprise that overthinking is definitely one of those first barriers that comes up for this modern day and age. And so
Yeah.
I honestly overthink everything, up to what I'm eating, to did I work out enough? Did I do okay in that interview? But do you guys find yourselves also overthinking things a lot, or how do you manage that?
Before, I used to overthink a lot actually.
Used
but
to.
I used to.
Okay.
I think still to this day, if there is anything relative to the idea of overthinking, I probably still do it. It's just probably in a new light.
Okay.
It's not the same approach. It's not the same thinking process. I actually think it's quite healthier. It's more, if anything, critical thinking to a deeper level than it is me overthinking on loop, kind of just the process of how things could go wrong or how they could go right, possibly. But I think that's interesting because I think it opens up the conversation to what exactly do we define overthinking to be? What consists in that?
Well, it's interesting how you differentiate it, like overthinking versus critical thinking, because I think they're both involve you going through a scenario in
Right.
depth, right? But like it's kind of to what end is sort of the question. Critical thinking, there's like intention and
Yeah.
there's purpose,
Yeah.
versus overthinking is like you're critically thinking to no end, to for no reason
Right.
at all, besides just to sort of rile yourself up. At least that's my experience in terms of trying to define it.
I like that.
I think it's often like seen as more of a barrier to what you're trying to, when you're trying to do something. Because I think when we talk about overthinking, we talk about wanting to maybe go back to school, but then I have all these doubts about maybe not being sure if I'm going to make it or not having the funds to do it, or even if I get it, if I'm going to get a job after. Like there's all these doubts that are
Right.
associated with overthinking, and I think it plays into some of the prior themes that we have talked about through the season of fear of failure, of fear of judgment of other people. So I think it is a really good one to kind of kick off the series for sure, of the whole idea of overthinking and letting, I guess, this is an interesting thought, like letting our thoughts control our actions rather than kind of having more control over our thoughts instead.
It feels like that sort of image of like who's in control is kind of like who's driving your car. You know what I mean? It's like when you're on like a like a mountain road.
Yeah.
Like the overthinker could say, like, I'm afraid to be the one in the wheel because of how scary this is.
Yeah.
You know, versus like if you're kind of more the ideal of what you're talking about, you're taking charge and being in control of your own car, despite maybe anxiety and overthinking still being in the car. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do think there's value in what David brought up about critically thinking, though, and I think there is a certain, I think we should distinguish that between thinking too much. I think overthinking is a negative thing versus thinking critically about a decision that you're making. And
Ooh.
how do you know the difference between that? Because I think oftentimes we confuse the two and we think, oh, I'm just thinking really deeply about something. But then from the outside, everyone's like, no, you're thinking about it too much. Just, just ask her out on a date.
Right.
Not that that's what we're talking
Oh.
about, but like,
Well, you know what? Let's
like,
talk about
jump
that.
That's a good practical example.
Let's talk about
just an example of like one thing you can maybe think about too much.
Okay.
And we could go into like all the things that kind of keep you from doing that thing,
Yeah.
whether it's like fear or,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add, I think like when we have this conversation of like overthinking, the thought that came across was the definition of rumination. And I think, you know, it being the loop of negative thoughts that keep replaying over and over in your head. And so I think how that's relative, ultimately, I think to the conversation is, if you're an overthinker, I think there's a lot of rumination that goes on. There's a lot of playing back. Perhaps it could be pessimism or just negative thoughts or, you know, sense of despair. It honestly can look so diverse, but I think ultimately it's just the negativity of your mind is taking control and almost like playing over and over again. And so I think overthinking kind of does that. I think overthinking could also potentially look like the overplaying of also positive or good results or circumstances.
That's kind of an interesting thing too. Is like overthinking can go both directions,
right?
Too.
Yeah.
But I loved what you talked about in terms of like looking for why we overthink, right? Or like why we rummage over the same experience like over and over again. And that's kind of like what Anthony hinted at, is like this it's trying to, maybe for some people it's avoidance, right? Like you had an interview or you're trying to think about asking to date somebody, but you're afraid of the outcome not going your way. And so it's like you're trying to justify in every possible way like why you're okay. You know?
Yeah.
So it's like if you're running with that example, so say for example, Anthony, for the listeners,
put me on the hot spot
let's
now?
say
What's going on here?
let's say,
Wait a
and maybe
minute.
David can
sign up
input
for
too.
this.
Let's say that you like were bouldering,
Oh, okay.
and you're bouldering and you see a gal climbing like a V5 or V6, and you're like, dang, like that's cool. Like I want to go talk to her and see like how she got to do what she did.
Nice.
What overthinking thoughts do you think you would have going to approach that gal?
What overthink? No, I'm just kidding.
What overthinking?
Hi, my name is Anthony.
Honestly, no surprises there.
No. I think instinctually there is that initial. I mean, it's a funny analogy, but to be honest with it, I think it is like this initial fear of, like I don't want to get rejected. I don't want to fail.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to anything in life, whether you're dating or not. It's like I don't want her to say no. Like I don't want that person to reject me and for me to take, a loss essentially. But I think your question was what kind of goes through my mind when...
Yeah, like what are the temptations to start overthinking the situation that can happen? And you kind of touched on some of those things.
I think it's thinking... I think personally, I resonate with a lot of what David said, thinking about something deeply. And I think at some point, sometimes thinking deeply can get in the way of acting deeply.
Ooh.
And so I think where that balance lies, I don't think there's necessarily like a perfect ratio, but when your thinking begins to be an obstacle that keeps you from acting, then I think that can be definitely a problem. Because I mean, so how often do we not do things because we took too much time to think about it, or we thought too long, and that opportunity just passed us by? Like I can just think of so many examples. I'm sure you guys can too.
Absolutely.
It kind of places the image in my mind of like if you could think about like the depth of your mind like a puddle of mud, right? Or like quicksand. At least for me, that's what like overthinking feels like.
Yeah.
Where it's like the more you try to fight it, like the further down you go.
Right.
And it's like this downward spiral, like I can't get out. But I feel like it's like if you're trying to pursue sort of the ideal balance of like not thinking too deeply about something, but also not being too shallow that you can't understand why you're doing something. So like, for example, of going back to that analogy, if you would, of dating somebody or asking someone on a date, it's like you don't want to think too deeply about how you talked, how you presented yourself. But you also want to think like, well, this girl looks really pretty, or I could tell she has like good friends, and I'm really interested in talking to her. Like if you miss out on your why, you're also missing out something too.
Yeah.
And so it's like you kind of have to be like in the mud, but not head under, but you also can't be like running on the surface,
Well, so how do you know when you're thinking too much? Where do you draw the line?
That's good. I think it's perhaps it has something to do with your self-awareness. I think being able to recognize, am I going through a process of deep thought, or am I going through a process of thought over and over again? And I think recognizing the distinction between those two, because I think, once again, one goes in depth and then the other goes in just a loop.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that's at least how I'm thinking about it
Yeah.
in perspective. Because if I had to say that my thinking process was ultimately like overthinking, then I would say like I'd overthink all the entire time. But
Mm-hmm.
I think realistic truth for me personally is probably a lot of it has to deal with just considering multiple perspectives that allow me to perhaps make a good choice, perhaps the best one, while also taking action in the smallest ways that I know that I'm doing something about still the situation, and not ultimately being very complacent, if you will, and maybe not taking that steps of action or progression. But I just something to think about it that I was thinking of is like your awareness. I think that has a big factor into this whole situation.
Like where are your thoughts cycling? Are they going in a direction that's productive and healthy, or is it like taking you back over and over through the same negative experience and fueling anxiety and depression and grief and all those things? That's really good. So that's like a self-awareness thing, which we don't tell anyone, but that's a future episode.
What do you think, Josh?
No, I was thinking about, I think the first thought that came to mind, especially like overthinking, in addition to like the notion of being fearful, like as a barrier, I think for me, especially like taking my boards for nursing, like there is a 2-day period, like after you take the exam, that you have to wait to get your results.
The two longest days of your life.
The 2 longest days of my life. And I think like during those 2 days, I think God really exposed that overthinking habit really plainly, because I was thinking through every single question that I had and thinking, well, wait, does that mean I did well? Does that mean I didn't do well? I could have done this better. I could have done that better. I could have studied this. If only I had studied it. Like it was just this cycle, like you said, of rummaging through the same exact questions and thoughts. And it was just putting me in this negative spiral, like so much so that my heart was just racing all the time. But the reality is I really had no control over what the outcome was at that point. And I think that that's something that I learned from this is not only is overthinking about the fear of maybe something like doing something like asking a girl out on a date, but I also think it's like a desire of trying to be in control. And so like that overthinking rummaging was me trying to justify to myself that I had some form of control over the outcome after something's already been decided for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think I think a fun perspective that I haven't been able to play into as much in this podcast, which maybe I should more, is the devil's advocate kind of perspective. And just kind of hearing your guys' responses, what it makes me think of is the value of actually waiting on decisions and what that does for us. Because I mean, I personally, like, I'm also in a waiting season, but I'm also thinking about how there's moments and times where we're placed into seasons of waiting for a reason. And I think that's an interesting idea too that I wrestle currently with, is like, why does God make us wait when he can do it today, when he could have done it yesterday? Like, what's the point of us waiting for a certain result when he sees that we've put in the work, when he sees that everything has been done up to that point? Like, why doesn't God just grant us, what we quote unquote, I guess, in our eyes deserve? And I think that's a consistent question that's been coming up for me as I'm in the search for travel nursing positions, because up until this point, I think I've done all the work that I needed to do. I mean, you guys know my process a little bit more, but I started this search probably 6 months ago, and since then I've been like in countless calls and trying to add more recruiters every month, and like none of that to my own prevail like has resulted in anything. And I look back at that and I think about how, like, doesn't God see me working hard in that department? Like, doesn't God see that I'm chasing after this thing that is good and that, I want, and that has been the end goal for me, and that is my dream career? Like, he surely knows that. Why is he holding me from that result? And that's a genuine question. Like, I think that I'm still trying to answer in this time, in this current time.
What lessons do you feel like God has taught you so far, like in the midst of that waiting season?
I think that's the challenging question, because I think initially I often don't understand. I think that's
your first reaction.
First reaction.
I don't get what you're trying to do with this.
I think I question God. kind of what I was saying there. The language that I was using was, why haven't I been granted this already? And then I think after 6 months' time of trying and failing, I think it's more, that question does turn more into, okay, like, what is God trying to teach me in this season?
Yeah.
And I think that reflection has definitely brought up a lot more insightful thoughts. One of those being the fact that a lot of the things that I'm doing right now would probably come to a very quick stop if I were to transition into travel nursing. And maybe God just thinks like there's more to do here first.
Right.
Which I think is really valid, as I'm pretty close to a competition. Like, it doesn't make sense for me to really pivot out at any point. And, you know, there's also aspects of community and things that I think I've built here that maybe I'm not necessarily ready to let go of yet. And maybe God knows that timing better than I do, you know?
Right.
But of those things, I think I still hold to that question of, like, why couldn't I have done it sooner, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's so good. You're posing like a really big question, I think, through your testimony, which thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Is like sort of this notion of, why do we wait? And also, I think, posing a bigger question, or kind of a challenge to our culture nowadays, which is all around spontaneity and instant gratification, right? And so we're built into a culture that gives you what you want, or should give you what you want right now, right? But interestingly, the language that you're using reminded me so vividly of the story of Jacob in the Bible, particularly when he is trying to get his girl, which is funny that we're talking about that. Like, he wants Rachel, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but he labors for 17 years, or I think it's like 7 or 17 years, before the father will give away his daughter.
Right.
But the first time that he gives away the daughter, he gives Leah, his other daughter, who, you know, is not the partner that Jacob wanted, but he was so committed to getting Rachel, he worked for another 17 years in order to get Rachel. And I have to imagine that there were moments in Jacob's labor where he was like, God, you already know what I want. Why do I have to still be working here in order for you to grant that for me? And I liked how you used the word grant, because grant implies that it's not in your power, it's in his power. Why won't he grant me this? Why won't he give this to me? But I think that one of the great things about Jacob, which we've mentioned before in this podcast, is how much God has like taught those fundamental lessons through his story, right? Like wrestling with God, that story where he wrestled with God, but then also the story of like leaning into God's providence in the season of waiting, even if it's 30 years for waiting for something that you want, but God has a timeline for what it's supposed to look like, you know?
Well, I think an interesting question to pose here, and maybe something that we actually haven't touched too much on, is how do you wait well? What's the secret to waiting and without knowing what the outcome may be? Because I think waiting is often seen as this
negative,
I don't even say this, passive action, like something that you do, but it also feels like you're not doing anything. And so how do you wrestle with that idea of waiting well, of waiting correctly, waiting biblically, waiting, this applies to, I think, dating, waiting for the right person to walk into your life. But does waiting, now that we're on topic of dating, right, like, does waiting just mean you just sitting around? Or does it mean you proactively putting yourself in places and not, you know, overstepping, but you're also waiting on the right, like there's nuance to this. So
Absolutely.
I'm curious how that is. Even in my situation, does waiting for me mean adding more recruiters every month? Is that an active form of waiting? Or is waiting just kind of like, you know, like open hand, like I'm dropping everything now and I'm just not even going to start searching, right? Because how is that going to lead to an assignment? So I'm throwing all these things at you guys because I think it's very practical in any season of anyone's life where they're waiting on anything.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, I'm sure all three of us have wrestled with ultimately what that really looks like at its core, of like having to think through, if I'm just going to take a step back and just wait for things to happen, is that what God wants me to do in waiting? Or is it more of like you said, Anthony, the alternative, proactively put yourself in situations where, you know, there's engagement, where you can interact, and on the topic of dating, you know, put yourself in a place where there's just more opportunities that opened up for you to engage with another person that might potentially be a partner down the road, et cetera, right? And I've actually wrestled with that a lot, and I thought about it to the point where, I mean, now we're on the topic and conversation of that. This whole episode's turned into a whole dating conversation.
This is dating series part 2. Yeah.
But I think about it, and I would probably have to agree more with the alternative, or the option where you were saying putting yourself, I guess, in opportunities, or engaging, at least saying yes and proactively going out to these opportunities, these events, these circumstances that allow you to have the potential and coming across a potential partner. And the reason I say that is because I think as a part of us as human beings, like, we are part of the equation that God has created, I mean, intricately in his image. So I feel, yes, God can do all of the work, but also we have to do our part as well. And a big part of that, I think, is taking the action and steps to make sure things can happen. But then I also think, what does that mean in honoring God's timing, which is another thing I wanted to mention. And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, I think it's one perspective to go about your life, achieve what you want, reach these accomplishments, attain all these great goals, and then consider how God has helped you in that journey. Or alternatively, in perspective, allow God to lead as the first step, and then see how in each door he's opening you to recognize, okay, is this part of your will? Is this in alignment with you? Is this bringing glory and, you know, honor to the kingdom? And so whether that's your career, whether that's your field of work, whether that's your dreams and goals, I think that's really important to ask, because now at the end of the day, not only are you in a waiting season, you're learning so much more the specifics of what waiting entails. And I think that's patience. I think that's all the fruits of the Spirit, being kind with yourself, remembering your why so you don't slip into relapse and, I don't know, go back to substance abuse or do drugs or, you know, watch adult film content, like things that basically distract and pull you away from meaning and purpose. And so that I say that heavily because it really matters, like how you maintain and how you fill the time wisely that you've been given while you're in a waiting season. I want to be a nurse practitioner, you know, all of these big dreams. Me, I want to be a big time, you know, content creator. I mean, there's so many things that obviously, like, we're all trying to achieve, but I think in that process, it's going to definitely take a very diverse and once again, nuanced step of approach.
Sure.
But that's just kind of the thought process that I was going on over here on this side while I was getting so much wonderful insight from you, Anthony, and just the conversation points that you were pinning on Josh.
Yeah, thanks for walking me through your process. I think it's interesting too to see that happen. And the question that kept, I'm curious to hear what you think too, Josh, but the question that kept popping in my head as you were sharing was, what if what you're describing here is more of this active waiting in comparison to this passive waiting, right? If we were to put a name on it, just doing something in the waiting rather than just kind of sitting back and being complacent, right? It was just something we talked about in the previous episode. But this idea that came to mind was like, what if our actions in that active waiting is actually getting in the way of ourselves? Like, what if that action that we're taking is really what is being in the way of what God really wants to do, which is totally pivot me into a different career field. Like, I don't even want you to go into nursing. Why haven't you seen this? I put the roadblock here for a reason, man. Like, you know, like, how long is it going to take you to see this?
Yeah.
You know, is it 1 year of trying and not getting this? Or is it, you know, I love how the sun just got way brighter.
Yeah.
We're just cooking.
Because this is a big moment here.
It is.
God's like, all right, you're cooking.
I build it up.
He's like, moment of shine
yeah.
here.
You guys are being enlightened, literally.
Yeah, we're just like, whoa.
But, you know, like, what if we are getting in our own way? You ever think about that? Or, like, what if we are getting in God's way?
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
Well, I like to think about, I think it's actually interesting because the first example I could think to answer this question is your life. Because his life, Anthony's life, has really been nothing but, I think, listening for God's timing, particularly when it seems like it may not seem like the right timing. And so it's like, starting bodybuilding, like while you're doing nursing, while you were working, while you were like trying to figure out other things in your life that were just not totally clear. It's like, I feel like the first thing I described, like to you as a friend, if I described you to other people during that season, was obedient. Is because you were not necessarily doing things on your own timeline, but on God's timeline, and it just happened to be all at the same time. Like there's seasons of life where like God's like, all right, here's 5 yeses, and I want you to say yes to all 5 of them right now. But then there's also those seasons right now, right, where it's like, oh, God is saying, well, I want you to pump the brakes like significantly, in terms of this trajectory that you're going, and it's no surprise to me that the language you use to describe your situation is, maybe God wants me to do more where I am. Maybe he's pumping the brakes so I can stop in this town of life, and sit here for a little bit longer, and even just in talking to you, like I've recognized that there's so many good things that have happened during this season that you were not expecting to still have. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so true, actually.
Right? And I think that's something that is sort of the gap when it comes to waiting, is a lack of an ability to appreciate where you are, because you're trying to put your value and your future into what's ahead. So it's like, for me, it's like I'm waiting for a job, right? And I'm like eagerly anticipating that next step, that next season that I've been working so hard to get towards. But one of the same lessons I'm learning is like, what are the lessons that God is trying to teach me right now, in my current job, in my current space, with my current coworkers? Like, why am I in a rush to move on to the next thing when there's still work to be done? But then, I think of Philippians, where Paul says to live is Christ, to die is gain. And we've talked about that like a couple days ago. And like that, I think that also gives context to the waiting, because ultimately, more than anything else that we're waiting for in life, we're waiting to be reunited with with Jesus, right? And so it's like, if that is the goal of our waiting, more than anything else that matters in this life, then everything is so much more minuscule to that, right? Not to say that's not important to God, it's not important to us, but it contextualizes our waiting within the greater context of our eternity. So it's like that one job you're waiting for, like for travel nursing, that is less than like a millimeter in the grand scope of the plan that God has for you. And so if God has that context over your life, why can't you trust God's vision and plan for your life if it's just a small part? A little bit of a devil's advocate comment.
No, that's good. And I think that the response to that is, I think I can't trust, because I also am, self-admittedly, I think a lot of times short-sighted in seeing the vision that maybe someone else can so easily see in my life, but I can't see in my own. I think that's
that's a word.
Yeah, and I think that's an often thing of, we can so easily point out the plank or the little speck in someone else's eye and not see the plank in our own.
Right.
Bro, mine's like literally falling out of my face.
It's like, I repeat this cycle a lot of taking my own advice, because I think of oftentimes, what would I do if someone else were to have this issue, rather than like, I'm so good at solving other people's problems and the worst at solving my own. And I think that's an interesting thing too, because how often do we take our own advice, or is this something that we just kind of say and not really live off of and live on? And I think to your point, Josh, a lot of what you said was so true, in that the season that you're waiting and the perspective and the contextualization of it, those are just really good words that really paint that picture really well.
I mean, what do you guys feel like, and sort of in this, like, kind of backing up a little bit into the topic of overthinking, right? Like, within the context of thinking about waiting, right? Like, I think that a lot of overthinking happens in the waiting, right? Which is kind of why we got onto that topic of that. So, like, what are the remedies for overthinking then? We kind of talked a little bit about, like, contextualizing your situation, but what are some, like, practical remedies that have helped you navigate maybe stopping that cycle, that loop.
Of overthinking.
Yeah, in the past.
I think top 3 things that come across my mind in order to combat overthinking, whether it be a positive loop or a very cynical negative loop of rumination, I would say 1, journaling, getting your thoughts down on a paper. I would say 2, going out for a run, or if that's any type of form of exercise, a walk, if that's bouldering, if that's going on a hike, if that's simply just, taking your dog out on the grass in the field and, deeply connecting with the ground or something like that, or whether that's flying a kite, getting your mind basically focused on an action where you can actually exert energy. And then I think thirdly would probably be having a conversation with someone who can be a very good active listener. And I'd say because of that social aspect, we as humans at a very origin level, we desire that connection to be ultimately heard and seen. And so if we don't get that social interaction that affirms that, we're challenged in so many ways to navigate by ourselves. And I think so, to go back to the ideas of what we were talking about, context 100%. It matters in the fact of what exactly does it mean to be proactive, or what does it mean exactly to be passive in the way that you can still be in a waiting season with God. Because both of those things, I'm not going to say this one's right, this one's better, this and that. I would just encourage that both perspectives have so much merit and validity. And because of that, when we're walking into a perspective of waiting in a season that God has us either planted or trying to figure out to say yes to all these 5 different things, that we go ahead and take that opportunity, take that chance to explore, to necessarily grow in relationship to the Lord. Because I think the worst thing you could do that wouldn't honor the Lord would to be saying like, no, Lord, I see what's in front of me, and I'm just going to reject everything that's in front of me. And that doesn't mean you're saying no to all of these things. You could say no, but I think the basis is trusting in God as you make those choices, whether you say yes to those 5 things or you say no, Lord, you're telling me perhaps not to take a step in these 5 different things, these options. So I think it really matters in the light that we can understand our approach in the way that overthinking can happen, whether it's I don't know the future, or I might be very tunnel vision, nearsighted about trusting that something can work out for me, or there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, these are all things I've checked the box on because, once again, I live life on hard difficulty, and so I've got to see a lot of niche points in all of them. But I think I wouldn't have it any other way, because I love the fact that I can learn so much more about others and then also more deeper myself in that process. There's so many great insights and critical feedback that I can receive that'll definitely either challenge and hammer a specific point or perspective, and that I'm like, whoa, okay, I need to get on that, or I need to understand, or something where it's like, no, I'm grounded in what I'm saying, and that's what I'm going to stand by. And then if I have to learn from that, where I'm totally stubborn right now and I might be wrong or arrogant, then the Lord will, I would hope, reveal that to me in a way that I can receive that. But yeah.
I'm curious to know, you mentioned one of the resources that you have to combat or overthinking is other people, particularly ones who are able to active listen. What's the value of having someone who can active listen versus somebody who can just listen to you without really giving you that active feedback? Particularly when it comes to, like you said, like trying to listen to what God's telling you to do and having him dictate your decisions over your own choices. Like, what's the importance of someone who can be actively listening and hold you accountable?
I would say it brings me back to the psychological term of abstract thought.
Okay.
And so, little crash course, you have abstract thought. And so if you're communicating with a person that doesn't necessarily meet at the same frequency and level in abstract thought and understanding, then that means when you're trying to communicate something, so for example, like very dreamer-like or very visionary or very big, grand in like perspective, then that person might be lacking in that frequency. So therefore, the understanding level is different now. And I say this because when you're going to the topic of overthinking in a very practical sense, like having a person who's a great active listener But then I think there's two different parts to that. You can have a person who's an active listener who solely just listens and is present there with you. And then there's distinctly the other in contrast, where there's an active listener that'll challenge you and basically have all this feedback to give to you. And so I think it's important to recognize, I think exploring either or. For me, a lot of the times that I think I'm needing, and from what I'm saying in a practical standpoint, is depending what person you are, it differs whether you should have a person. I would encourage to have a person that challenges you while they're finished active listening, like within conversation with you. Or for me specifically, because once again, I live life on hard mode, a lot of it has to deal with just having someone that like listens and is present with me during that time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I'm tracking. It's like you and that's I think that's usually prompted by the question that I usually ask people if they're looking for help, is what version of me would be best to support you right now?
Yeah.
Do you need me just to be here to listen to you and not give you feedback? Or
Right.
are you looking for someone to actually critique and give you feedback on what's going on in your life?
Yes.
And I think it's important to have someone who can do both. But if
Right.
you don't have someone who can do both, find one who can do both.
Yes.
Find one who can do one or the other.
or the one that you're looking for.
Yeah, or the
you
one that
know?
you're looking for.
And if you're still exploring, I mean, go for that challenge, you know. Oh, I don't know
Yeah.
necessarily what I'm looking for, but I'm willing to give. But the thing with that is, once again, everything takes risks. So if that doesn't end up working out, then you will end up getting hurt in a way where it's like, oh, this is not what I needed. Like, I needed someone to listen and just be here, right? And so that's going to differ. And so I think, once again, that's why it's a challenge in either perspective, and risk comes with all of the opportunities that we have here, is because you're, no matter which way you're going to go, it's always going to be a learning process. And with learning, things are not going to go the way that you want or the way that you desire or the way that you thought.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as a big part of overthinking, I would just still encourage, like, explore those options, especially when it goes down that one option of socializing with a friend who's an active listener. And to even be a little bit more better, maybe not even a very close friend, perhaps a mentor, perhaps a pastor, perhaps someone who's a teacher to you, a professor, someone that you trust very deeply, like a guardian or a mother or father figure, where you can totally be transparent and not feel judged. Like, these are just all examples. But I think I would encourage that one, because that one then implements another person, another being in the equation. When you're journaling, that's by yourself. And then when you're what was my other option? I think
you have a lot of different options.
Well,
You put
I
them
had
on
the
the
three.
table.
Something that I think about hearing you is actually the opposite of choosing to not necessarily get advice from others. And this is actually an interesting idea too, because I think I had a friend recently that is working through a very recent breakup, and something that I suggested to him was, actually don't tell anyone about this until you've given yourself the time and space to process it alone. And I said that for a few reasons, because I think that we often, I think one is we all really suck at taking advice, but number two, we also don't use our own brains enough to really think about what we have learned in that situation or in that point of life, or what is God trying to teach us. And we often give other people the opportunity to speak into that space before we even get to really process that on our own.
That's interesting
And
too.
yes, and I think that's the pushback that I have. I think advisors are really important. I have a lot of mentors in my life, a lot of coaches. You guys already know that. But I invest in them as well. But I think there is this important aspect of having your own brain, your own mind, your unique David Hearing, your unique, Josh Yee brain, and seeing that situation, seeing and navigating that problem the way that David Hearing would, the way that Josh Yee would.
Yeah.
And that's going to be different than any advisor could tell you, and that's going to be different, than even maybe your girlfriend can tell you. But it's such a, I think, unique way to see life and develop some of those abilities of self-awareness that we talk about. Because at the end of the day, how can we solve our problems if there isn't anyone around us? How do you solve your problems when you're the only person that you can ask?
Well, it's like, and then I think that prompts a really great question, is like, if you were by yourself, if you didn't have those resources, right? Like if you didn't have that friend, that mentor, that pastor to speak life and truth into your situation, how then would you navigate that? And you pose that really great question, because then it prompts a question for me of, who else remains? And that's where God comes in for me. Is like during that 2 days of 5,000 years, it felt like waiting for those results. Ultimately, I talked to you. I talked to my parents. I talked to my girlfriend. I talked to my siblings. I talked to everybody that I felt like could give me validation that I did the best I could.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the only person who could substantially, legitimately give any peace was God.
Right.
And the only way that happened was by me authentically and genuinely surrendering my ability to control my situation. And that took multiple times of being like, God, it's up to you.
Yeah.
And then I'd get reminded of something that would say, nope, you're actually in control. I'm like, oh no. And then I'd be like, nope, God, it's yours. Nope, God, it's yours. Nope, God, it's yours, you know?
Yes.
And like, that's something that I think if you don't have a faith, you miss out on. Because like you said, whether it's your opinion or whether it's other people's opinion, in our human brokenness, we're fallible.
Right.
And I remember sort of during a dark season of my life, one of the mentors that I saw, or who was in my life at the time, she wrote me a letter. And on that letter it said, don't let anyone except God tell you the truth about who you are in the season.
I
And
love
that was the most influential moment in that season that frankly set my trajectory in the positive direction, because it made me focus on who actually is going to tell me the truth about who I am and the trajectory I'm going. Is it going to be Anthony Chow? He can get close, but he's not going to be quite there. Is it going to be my dad? He's going to get close, but not quite there. But God's already got that design for you locked in before you were born.
Yeah.
You know?
That's good.
Yeah,
That brings up a really interesting question in my head, which is how often do we do things that were not originally suggested by somebody else?
Ooh, can
Right.
you rephrase that?
Yeah, like how often do we make decisions that are solely based on what we want? And it sounds like a very surface level question at first, but then I think about all the decisions I made up to this point, and I wonder how much my parents played into it. I wonder how much my friends played into it.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that I think we do that because of social, in some ways we want that social approval or the acceptance of other people to do the things that we're doing. But at the same time, I think I found a lot of joy and a lot of just excitement in just choosing to do things also that nobody suggested.
You sure do that.
And things that and like,
so do you.
and nobody, nobody, cared to tell you about. And that came from kind of like a little bit of digging deeper and soul searching. So I think so much of, I think about nursing. I'm like, did someone plant that thought in my head, or was that an original one that, grew up from me just really wanting to be a nurse? And I think that applies across the board with a lot of things.
Yeah. It poses, I think, not necessarily like a devil's advocate question, but sort of like a lost prompt that we can think about for this episode, which is this notion of, are we the product of our influences, or are we or should we be the product of our own influence? And I think for me, like that poses a point of, people can tell you who you should be. You can, whether that's a belief system, a religious system, a family system, your friends, your work, right? Your finances. But ultimately you have the choice. You yourself have the choice of how you're going to respond to them. Yeah. I think that a lot of people that I know, including myself for a long time, I was under the belief that I am only who people tell me I am. I'm only who my spouse tells me I am. I'm only who my spouse's family tells me I am. I'm only who my grades tell me I am. But the reality is that you have the ability to decide where your identity comes from. Yeah. You have the ability to choose where. And I think both of your guys' lives, and my being just a witness, are testaments to that. You saying, I know that people are telling me I'm in a bad financial position, but I'm not going to let that dictate that I'm not in a good place in life. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, I think that it's been interesting to see both of your guys' lives in good and not good seasons, and to see how I feel like the baseline of where you are is the same. Like, I'm good. bro, it feels like everything's so chaotic. And I'm chilling, bro.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm happy. But if it doesn't feel like everything's going well, it might look like that on the outside, but I'm thriving.
Yeah.
You know, you can choose to live that way.
Mm.
You know, I could be waiting for this to wait to hear back from interviews, and I could have the attitude of everything is awful, and I'm never going to be a nurse. I'm never going to this, like, or I can choose, you know what? This is one opportunity that I'm going to have to keep going down this road. And I'm not going to let a no in this stop me from pursuing other yeses.
Right. And perhaps that means like redirection.
Yeah. Redirection, which
Right.
is like, it's just one of those remedies
Yes.
for overthinking.
Right.
Is like, get out of that loop.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's actually interesting to talk about. Maybe, not sure if we have time in this episode, but even in a later one in the series is like, how do you know when to quit? How do you know when to, you know, pull out, like, you know, wave the white flag and
Say,
just
"I'm
call
done."
it quits? Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, and then I think there's a time and place for that too.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to know that, because as someone who hates to give up, I think I find a lot of challenge in waving that white flag. But I think sometimes that's what it takes for God to really make big moves in my life.
Yeah.
And I think something that I consistently think about is, how is waving this white flag gonna take me to the finish line of maybe a race that I never thought I'd ever start?
Or make you appreciate the things that are on the race that you wouldn't have appreciated because you were too focused on the goal.
Yeah.
You know?
I think there's so much there.
Yeah.
Final thoughts?
Woo! I have too many.
You have too many?
No, go ahead. You go ahead
Please.
first, David.
Are you sure?
Yeah, for sure, bro.
A culmination that I had of both your two ideas, Josh and Anthony, was how every single day is a battle and the opportunity, a second chance to repent. It's also another opportunity and a chance to surrender.
Yeah.
And so when Anthony was talking about the white flag, you know, I'm challenged by that every single day. Like, in a season that I have a timeline of I'm here for this long because I have a fixed flight, or, you know, home for this season, or I plan to work for this, and it's like I'm focused on all these big visions and dreams and things. It's like one day at a time, but I'm reminded of the why, and ultimately it brings me back down to each day is an opportunity to surrender. And so if I choose that surrender, I get to, but ultimately what you were tapping into was appreciating, whether it is in complacency, to be honest, or whether it is in contentment, to be appreciative of what I have now. And that's ultimately why, you know, I have so much peace, even though Anthony brings a lot of good, challenging, rigid points, is because every single day I just don't look at it at the way where it's like I worry so much about the timeline or progression, or truly, once again, I always say this, it's like I could care less what other people think, because I live by that in the privacy that I hold. I live by that in the friendships and relationships that I hold. I live by that in the relationship I have with God. And it's like, if anyone were to ask me, I would love to share and catch you up to speed on how God has changed my life. But in that process, I still, once again, I go deep in the reflection that Anthony was talking about, and I tap into a lot of that soul searching, that reflection of taking that one step back every single day, pausing, and then I'm remembering what's my why, how am I going to do that today, what's the approach, what's on schedule, if I don't hit that, can I still appreciate all the effort that I gave today, even if it was 1% better. And there's this phrase in Japanese called shufuku, I believe, where ultimately it translates and paraphrases to the idea of getting 1%, a small percentage, better every single day. And I just love that idea. Hopefully I got the concept right idea right. Fact check me on that, y'all. But
Our Japanese listeners are like,
they're like, oh, that's the wrong way.
Made up that word.
Yeah, it's totally like different wording.
Just kidding.
I'm so sorry.
No,
But
just joking.
I think that's the one that
that's what comes to
came
mind.
back to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like in the waiting, like you're still progressing.
Right.
And I think that like that's but progression doesn't necessarily mean you make 10% every day. It could mean 1%. Like Anthony taught me that when I first learned how to weight lift.
Yeah.
Is like one rep extra
Yes.
per time you go is still progression. You don't have to be going up freaking 50 pounds to be considered progressing.
Yeah.
Maybe after a year, maybe after whatever time, sure. But like even that one extra rep, you are moving forward.
Yeah.
And to other people, like, oh, you're not really getting stronger. You're doing the same weight. Actually, I am.
Yep.
Actually, I am. You can't see it, but I am.
Yep.
You know, I think I have two takeaways. The first takeaway is something that we kind of touched on throughout the course of it, is like having people in your life that not only can hold you accountable, but also know what your tendencies are. So I think the people in my life, especially like when I was in the waiting for my nursing like licensure, knew the sort of cycle that I go down, and were able to speak very clear and very accurate truth of who I was based on how they already know I respond to these situations. So Anthony did that really well. You did that really well, and my family as well. And then I think also for if any of you who are listening are in a season of waiting and find yourself overthinking about where you are in life, what God's calling you to, I'd encourage you to think about, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's this analogy that a couple of pastors I've been with have done, where they get this rope that's like 500 yards long, and they put this small piece of tape on one section of that piece of tape, like in the middle of it. And they say this small 1-inch piece of tape is your entire life. And the entire rest of the rope is eternity.
Yeah.
And you think about this one small experience that's causing you so much anxiety and distress is only on this tiny piece of tape in the grand scope of eternity.
Yes.
The two great things about that is A, God cares about that small moment just as much as he cares about the rest of your eternity.
Yeah.
But also there's the rest of eternity. So be mindful of the context of your life. And I think that for me, and I still do, I'm doing that right now, like trying to continue to focus on the context of the eternity that God has for me.
Yeah.
That's good. I think for me, to sum it all up,
Sum it all up. ChatGPT this.
no, I'd say if you're between the ages of 18 and 27, you're a young adult and you're struggling with overthinking, I think the one question that you need to be asking yourself is, what would I do if nobody was watching?
Wow.
And I think that will allow you to make decisions that aren't necessarily based off of what other people pour into your life, but really allow you to dig deeper into maybe what God wants out of your life, and maybe for the first time in your life, what you want, actually.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Killer.
I'll pray us out.
Yeah.
Please.
Come on.
Father God, thank you for this beautiful day that we get to have this conversation, and just allowing us to continue having these conversations and these episodes. It's just been such a blessing, I think, for all of us on this side of the lens, as well as everyone else that's watching this. And it's just been an interesting season, I think, for a lot of us, of waiting and also trying to seek what it is that you want us to do. And oftentimes that comes with doubt, that comes with comparison, that comes with a lot of mindset things that we've talked about in this episode. But I think at the end of the day, God, that we pray that we draw closer to what your vision is for us, and that our vision continues to align closer to what that is. Thank you for this time. Thank you for just all the moments that we've got to express our thoughts, and that I just pray that some of that just landed on our audience, that we just may be your vessels in this world to show and reflect your love. Thank you for this time, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Alrighty, and that's going to be the end of episode 16.
Yes.
First episode of our 5-part series. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Definitely helps us grow our channel. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, definitely leave us a rating. Definitely helps us grow as well. And it's been good. It's The Good Life, your practical guide to adulting. We'll see you guys in the next one.